All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Invincible. Yes, we are. Now, picking up after the last video, there's a few things we need to follow up with. The first is that given that Zandale, who was kind of the replacement Invincible while Mark was basically off in space, because he had allied with Rex Robot and had basically turned against the superhero community, he had actually orchestrated the capture of those superheroes who had effectively gone underground. And so this basically led to them being snatched up, rounded up, right, taken back to the Pentagon, where they were basically being held prisoner and so on and so forth. But then you ended up finding out that Sinclair had actually, because he stood against what Rex Robot was doing, had actually helped them to escape. And then in turn, fired up a rocket and seemingly just took off into space, right? We don't know exactly what it is that happened to him, but where all these guys were basically hidden out, where they were essentially removed, didn't really want to have a whole lot of involvement here, sort of just kind of staying hidden. This basically led to Rex Robot figuring out where they were at. Now, of course, the crazy thing about this is Rex basically says, like, look, I've got eyes and ears everywhere, right? Like, I mean, it was only a matter of time before I found you guys. You couldn't have stayed hidden forever. The other thing about this is that instead of approaching it from a place of violence, he actually approaches them and says, look, I get that you guys want to fight against this. I get that you guys want to fight against this change and what it is that I'm doing here, but look around you. People have never been safer, right? Crime is down, all that stuff, right? The world is categorically a safer place because of what I've done. What you are doing is you are trying to maintain the status quo of the world being a chaotic mess, probably for no other reason than to justify your existence. Because what purpose do you serve if the world is saved? Suddenly, you have no purpose, right? You just find yourself just flying headfirst into an existential crisis. And so that's the thing, like making this compelling argument and saying like, I've improved everything, I've made everything better, people are happier than they used to be. A lot of them actually end up siding with Rex and just kind of being like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot more that we can do, right? There's a lot of things that can be done to basically fix this and to make the world a better place. And so there's no real fight to be had here. There's no real major conflict. He was like, for those of you guys who want to stand against me, okay, that's fine, right? But in time, you will see how I've made this world a better place. And in time, you will come to me. You know, he's like, I'll allow you to take some time to figure out what it is that you want to do without me hunting you down or attacking you unless you come after me, right? If you come after me, then we have a problem. But take the time you need. Now, what this is really him just saying like, I will come back at a future point in time. And when that happens, we will make a decision. Like we'll determine whether or not you're going to stand against me or with me. If you stand against me, then we're enemies and I will hunt you down and I will kill you. If you stand with me, then we're good, right? So like, just take the time you need to figure it out. And so following that, there's a couple things that go on here in terms of leaving Earth, because at this point, we kind of leave Earth and we don't really come back for a little while. One of the first things you do is you basically pick up with a coalition of planets and with Alan the alien addressing the rest of the coalition members. And one of the things about this is, you know, when it comes to, if you guys ever watch like these kind of like sci-fi movies, or you ever watch politics or anything like that, oftentimes there's a lot of veiled threats, right? A lot of allusions to the fact that like things are about to get really, really bad for a particular person. An example of this is when Alan is talking about how they are basically diverting as many of their forces as they can to track down Thrag. So long as Thrag, right, so long as Freddie Mercury exists out there in space, he will never stop trying to rebuild his Viltrumite army, and he will never stop trying to hunt down the coalition of worlds, destroy them, and then in turn, bring the quote-unquote Viltrumite race back to a state of glory, right? Like he will never stop doing that. But that's when one of the members of the coalition basically chimes in and says, okay, our report from the space racer, who's basically a spy out there keeping an eye on what it is that Freddie Mercury's doing, he's reported back that Freddie Mercury is basically like, he chose the planet Mantia and has chosen that because of the genetic makeup of its people. They age faster and they are closely in line with the Viltrumite race. It allows him to build his own army. And of course, the response of Alan the Alien is like, yes, we already know that. Like we already know that's what's going on. You know that, I know that, right? And we as the reader know that because we've literally been covering it. The reason why this is brought up by this council member is that she says, sure, I mean, it's a worthy task to try to track down Thrag, but why not just use the nature of that race or a race similar to it to build up our own army, right? Like, why can't we just turn Mantia into a breeding farm, one that's twice as productive, and build our own army so we can overcome them? And the response of Alan the Alien is no. Like, I am not a fan of conquering a world and using it as a breeding colony in order to ensure that we somehow defeat Freddie Mercury and his own race. Now, this is an important thing because this is an option for success that's being presented to Alan the Alien. And notice, he's turning it down. At that point, some of the members of the council, I mean, it's almost kind of split 50-50. Not all of them agree with this council member's proposal, but some of them do. And that's important because what this does is this is going to start sowing the seeds of resentment, that if things start going south, people are going to think back to options that Alan the alien was getting, and because of his moral high ground, refuse to accept them. And the reality is that when it comes to fighting wars, there is no room for the moral high ground. There's the people who win and the people who lose, and that's it. The morality of a dead man is irrelevant in the face of the victor because history is written by the victor. So the morality of that loser doesn't matter. It's irrelevant, right? The people who win wars are the ones who live long enough to win them. That's the thing. And so it's one of those interesting concepts, is because at that point, Alan the alien, when he's visited by one of the members of the council who's like, look, you know, they were totally out of place for suggesting that. Just know, Alan, not everybody on the council is against you. That's the veiled threat. Because the veiled threat is there are people on the council who don't want you here. They think that you're not a very effective leader, right? They're basically working against you, right? That's the thing to understand. And so that really kind of lingers over Alan the alien's head, right? Like, heavy is the head that wears the crown. That some people, when you're leading a massive coalition like that, some people are going to want to see you fail, if for no other reason than the fact that the way you conduct business is totally different than the way that they would do it, and they think they can do it better, right? Other times, it's because you really are just an inept leader, right? It just depends on the situation. Depends on the context. But the thing about that is ultimately, Alan basically has this kind of conversation with Mark and Oliver, where he basically says, look, so word has reached our ears that basically Space Racer has managed to track down what's going on with Thrag, and we need you guys to go there and take him out. Like, we've located him. We need you guys to remove him from the board. Hopefully Space Racer hasn't been detected. Hopefully nobody knows he's there, only for us to find out he was detected and Freddie Mercury has basically killed him. But it's one of those things where Mark essentially has to kind of leave things behind yet again. Now, again, this is just part of this is the nature of the beast, right? It's kind of the agreement that was struck between Mark and Adam Eve, in the sense that, like, if they're here, that sure, he won't necessarily be operating on Earth in the same way that he was, that he did before, but there will be times where he has to leave to go on a mission, right? It's just the nature of the job. And so the result of this is that they kind of came to an agreement of, okay, right, just don't be gone too long. And so what this does, of course, is it leads to Mark and Oliver and all these different forces basically taking off and ultimately tracking down Freddie Mercury's location, only to find out that once they get there, he's seemingly not there, right? And in fact, there's no indication they were ever there, right? Literally, they just disappeared, right? They just vanished. And so they're like, okay, that means that if they killed Space Racer, then they have to know that we're on to them. So sure, I guess it would make sense that they would basically just up and leave. Ultimately, they end up finding one of the spies. And the problem is that this spy is basically a coward, right? They're like, what are we paying you for? Because he's like, I don't know what happened, man. I mean, I know there was like a great big huge fight with Space Racer and all those guys, but when the fight broke out, I just ran and hid. And it's just like, dude, you have no balls, man. Like, a total coward in that way. But what he does say is that they were, when he came out of hiding, they were all basically gone. But his response is, I'm not really sure they actually left this place. I'm not sure they left this planet. They could be virtually anywhere. And so what it does is it leads to Oliver and the forces of the coalition of planets basically searching the surface, and it leads to Mark searching the subterranean realm. Now, this is where things get crazy, because when this happens, Mark basically seems to fall down what seems like this infinite well, right? Like just this giant hole. Like he just kind of, something's like actually pulling him down into this place that he can't avoid. And when he gets down to where this is, he's met by what seems like this giant kind of, light-based thing, construct, organism, or whatever, which engulfs Mark, and then Mark wakes up back home on Earth. The entire continuity of Invincible basically just got rebooted. And that's the crazy thing, is because at that point, Mark's trying to figure out what in the world is going on, right? He's like, okay, so this is weird. Like, I'm basically waking up at this moment, and Omni-Man is like facing off against the dragon. Like, it all feels very familiar, right? And so one of the things, and this was kind of interesting, really, this gets fast-tracked. We don't really get we don't have Robert Kirkman giving us like a whole great big huge set of events. Instead, a lot of the stuff gets fast-tracked because there is a point to the end of all this. So Mark basically goes to school and he visits Adam Eve, right? Right off the bat, he says, okay, like, I know who you are. I know that you're basically Adam Eve. I know you have powers, all that kind of stuff. We need to talk. Like, we need to have a conversation. In effect, like, he tells her, like, I know you're part of the teen team, and I know all that stuff. Rex and Dupli-Kate and everything. I know everything that's going on. And initially, the only reason why Adam Eve even brings him to the location of the teen team is because at that point, it's like, okay, we need to know what's going on with this guy. Like, we need to understand what's happening with this guy. And literally, he just spills the beans. Like, one of the things he tells Robot is, like, you're not even a robot, right? Like, you were born deformed. You're in a lab across town. You live through this robot construct. Your name is basically Rudy. And so where no one else on the teen team knows this, and it's just like, okay, man, whatever. Like, at this point, you're just being kind of nuts. That's crazy. The response of Robot is, no, it's actually true. Nobody was supposed to know that. None of you were supposed to know that. Like, those of you guys who recall, like, who've been following us all this time. Remember the story way back when, where basically that pissed off professor whose son was bullied and ended up going crazy was basically turning the students into human bombs? That guy's arrested before anything ever actually happens, right? Rex is still there, of course, with Adam Eve, right? The two of them are still knocking boots. But basically what Mark starts doing here is he starts going through and trying to rectify all these different problems, all these mistakes, right? He tries to save as many lives as humanly possible. Now, the big elephant in the room here is, of course, Omni-Man. It's Nolan, because this is way back when. This is before the fight broke out between Mark and Nolan. This is before anybody became aware of the fact that Nolan was actually a Viltrumite or any of that stuff. This is all the way back at the very beginning of the story. Mark being thrown back here into the past is basically him just kind of being like, okay, how am I going to confront my dad with the fact that I know he's a Viltrumite, I know he's been sent here to conquer the world, and I need to find a way to stop him, right? How is that going to happen? But along the way here, it's literally him getting his costume from like the suitor, right? The guy who designs costumes for everybody, picking his costume right off the bat. It's him facing off against like the Mauler twins. It's them busting Sinclair when he was making robots, right? It's basically him capturing and busting all these different villains before anything pops off, right? When the Zaxxals start showing up here, right? That alien race, like when they start arriving here, and basically, you know, it's well, through a whole lot of casualties, they end up realizing the longer they're here on Earth, the faster they age, that what Mark starts saying is just hold them in place, right? Like hold them in place, don't die. They will age up exceedingly fast, right? Like that's just how their race works, right? Time passes differently in their dimension than it does here. They will age rapidly. And initially people don't necessarily believe him, but ultimately they do. Now, if you guys recall in that fight, basically Omni-Man showed up, you know, the whole fight and conflict and everything went nuts. And then he ended up being trapped inside that race's dimension. Instead, Mark stops him and is like, okay, so, yeah, like when Omni-Man's like, do you have powers? Mark's like, yeah, right? Because remember, when Omni-Man learned Mark had powers, it didn't happen this way. And so when the two of them start talking in the end, his father's like, you know, why wouldn't you tell me that you have powers, right? You know, he's like, well, I was trying to figure out how to tell you. He's like, we need to go talk outside. And so what he does is is the two of them fly into the sky. And it's probably one of the best moments in all of Invincible. The two of them fly into the sky, and Mark starts talking to Nolan. And he's like, you know, first things first, I need to know, do you love me? And do you love Debbie, right? Do you love my mom? And the response of Nolan is, of course I do. Like, why wouldn't I? Like, why would I not love you or your mom? I love you guys with all my heart. You guys mean the world to me. Like, you're both extremely important to me. And he says, okay, please don't conquer the planet Earth. At that point, Nolan freaks, right? And just immediately starts attacking Mark. Now, well, I guess he doesn't do it immediately. Like, Mark basically explains, he was like, here's what's going to happen next, right? First, now that you know I have powers and our people can create offspring that have powers with people of this planet, you start making plans to take over. You kill the Guardians of the Globe because you know they could slow you down or maybe even stop you. Then you come to me and ask me to help you. You tell me you've been lying this whole time and why you were really sent here. And then you ask me to turn on Mom and all the people on Earth, and I refuse. I try to talk sense into you, to talk you out of it, but you won't listen, and then we fight, and you nearly kill me. But right before you do, you stop. You become an internet meme, and then later you tell me that you hesitated because you realize how much you love Mom and me. Eventually, we rebel against the Viltrumite Empire together, and we win. I don't know what's going through your head right now, but can we just keep talking this over? I know all of this sounds crazy, but I don't want to fight again. I really don't want to. And at that point, the fight's on. Like, literally, Nolan just starts attacking Mark. Now, Mark tries to, like, talk him down, but he's like, no, right? And he's just like, no, you have, like, Mark's like, you have to understand, we're going to turn against the Viltrumite race. It's what we're supposed to do. And the response of Nolan is, I'm no traitor. Like, I am not a person who's going to turn against the Viltrumite Empire. That's never going to be the case, right? My loyalty is to the Viltrumite race. I've been with them for thousands of years. This is never going to change. And so he's like, okay, I probably, you know, and so Mark basically races off. He's like, I probably should have thought about this better. But instead of the fight taking place the way it originally did, it is a pretty intense fight, but there's other things to also keep in mind here. Mark being sent back here is seemingly just as capable as he was before. Maybe not necessarily in terms of physical strength, but in terms of battle strategy, in terms of how to engage with someone like Omni-Man. And so where Nolan catches up to him, of course, because Nolan's not really paying attention, they basically end up fighting, and they end up crash landing. And that's when Nolan says, like, I won't stop until I've beaten some sense into you. This planet's fate was decided the moment our people discovered it. We'd only assure its demise by trying to save it. And that's when you end up finding out that what Mark had done is he had actually led Omni-Man to the home base of the Guardians of the Globe. So instead of Omni-Man killing the Guardians of the Globe without them suspecting it like he did in the main Invincible timeline. Instead here, they've learned he's a traitor. Now, of course, a massive fight breaks out, and to a degree, it goes the way you would expect, right? I mean, we knew that Nolan was, for the most part, way beyond the other members of the Guardians of the Globe, but what Nolan has in terms of strength and speed, the Guardians make up for in terms of numbers. And that's one of the things, right? I mean, there does come a point when you just have kind of like diminishing returns where a person is just so incredibly strong that no amount of forces you throw at them will be able to overcome them. But if the forces you have are relatively comparable in power, even if the power they have is in varying degrees, it is entirely possible they could overtake that person. And that's basically what happens with Nolan, right? Mark is just kind of knocked out of the way. And then the fight breaks out between like Nolan and the Immortal and all those guys. The Immortal gets a hole punched in him, but because he's basically immortal, of course, he'll end up surviving. And the other members of the Guardians all basically end up stepping in. And so this basically leads to them essentially overcoming Nolan, right? I mean, they basically managed to knock him out, and that's essentially it, right? I mean, they don't really kill him. Probably they don't really have the strength or the ability to kill him, but regardless, they're able to knock him unconscious. Now, while they do chain him up, of course, they also say like, this is not going to hold him. As soon as he wakes up, he's just going to immediately break free of these chains as if they weren't there at all, and then the fight's going to be back on again. But ultimately, because the Guardians of the Globe work directly with Cecil, what ends up happening is basically Cecil steps in. And when that happens, essentially, Omni-Man is taken by Cecil, right? He's basically in prison. Now, of course, Mark spills the beans on the history of his relationship with Cecil, right? Basically informing Cecil, here's everything that's going on, right? Here's how we worked together and all that kind of stuff. And so Nolan's basically taken prisoner and kept in stasis. And so what's nuts about this is that everything is starkly different. In a lot of ways, Mark has come out on top here, right? He's basically the good guy. He's saved countless lives. And all that really comes to a head after his conversation with Nolan, where Nolan says like, thank you for doing this, right? Like when you were like spilling the beans and you were telling me what was going on, I lost my cool, right? I basically went nuts. But ultimately you managed to talk me down, and that's basically it. And so what this does is it essentially leads to seemingly Nolan being taken by Alan the Alien once Alan the Alien first arrives on the scene, presumably being taken back to the Coalition of Worlds, only for us to find out that's not really what it is, right? That instead, Nolan basically, you know, talks with Debbie, kind of basically spills the beans to her for a little bit, and then ends up siding with Alan the Alien. So in a lot of ways, things have essentially turned out the same way, just seemingly by different means. But what this did is it saved the lives of countless people in the process. One thing to remember, there have been millions upon millions of people who have died in the various conflicts that have taken place over the course of the Invincible story so far, right? It's just been, in a lot of ways, absolute pandemonium and absolute chaos. With the Guardians of the Globe, really just like the teen team, that Mark basically goes forward in like finding various villains and like snatching them up, preventing them from being like a credible threat to anybody. And like, that's basically it. One of the big crushing blows that goes on here is that Mark never actually forms a relationship with Adam Eve, right? That never really happens. He saves her a few times and, you know, she thinks he's cute, but like she's with Rex, right? And she's loyal, right? I mean, she's loyal to Rex, even though he's kind of a dick, right? She doesn't really see a reason to like run off with Mark because Mark saved her from like some threat that she probably could have saved herself from, right? And so what ends up happening is Mark it really just kind of, you know, collapses under the weight of where he is, right? In the sense that like him and Adam Eve never get together. It's emotionally crushing. And that's when he's met by the return of this kind of blinding white light. And this is huge, right? This is a really, really big moment because he's like, you're that thing from the cave. Like, what in the hell are you? And what this thing says is, that is not important. Do you not realize how many you have saved? You have undone so much death and misery. Why are you not pleased? And Mark's response is, my life sucks, right? Like my life is worse than it was before. And they say, your changes have ripple effects. Something you did prevented Eve from catching Rex and Kate together. But we read you. We know you, Mark Grayson. Why would you trade those who died simply to maintain your relationship? And the response of Mark is, yes, you're right, right? Like, I mean, it wouldn't really make any sense to do that. Like, why would I trade the lives of people for the relationship that I'm in? And this thing says, you have already sacrificed so much. That is why we chose you. You are the only one we've encountered who could set things right. There is a balance to the universe and it has been disrupted. Somewhere along the way, things went wrong. Too many innocents have basically died. We have seen the world change in their absence. We exist outside of time. We see all at once. You touch so many. Your influence is vast. We saw that if you were set on another path, the balance would be restored. But you have to choose. This world you inhabit, your past, it is very real. The world you knew is gone. You have a chance to do things right, to save countless lives. But this path cannot be forced on you. That's why we gave you a taste of what could be, the good that could be done here. And the response of Mark when they ask him, will you stay here? Do you want to stay on this world? Do you want to basically continue sparing lives, right? Using your knowledge of the past in order to ensure that fewer people die? The response of Mark is, no. And then like, that's when the thing is kind of like, what? What? They were expecting him to say yeah. And he's like, I have a daughter. And so he says, no, if I have to choose this, then I'm saying no. That's not going to happen. And that's when they're kind of like, I mean, this was not foreseen. You're pure, right? You're selfless. How can you turn this down? And he says, even I will get together. We'll probably even have a child, but there's no way that child would end up being Tara. Choosing this means killing my daughter. And he says, you would allow the countless deaths that you could prevent to occur just to save one life, right? You know, this thing is like, you would let millions and millions and millions of people die to save the life of one person. And the response of Mark is, yes, I would. And they're like, how could we not have foreseen this, right? Like, we knew every single moment of your life. You've sacrificed so much for so many people already. You were our last hope. And then like in the end, Mark's like last hope for what, right? Like, you haven't told me anything, right? You haven't told me like who you are. You haven't told me what I'm preventing. Like, this is all just ridiculous, right? You put me through hell and you think that I would just choose to stay here? He was like, screw this, right? Like, I mean, that you haven't given me a reason to want to stay here. And so ultimately this thing's like, we would be unable to explain to you what we are, or at least what we're trying to prevent, in a way that you could possibly comprehend. And so this thing says, like, it is true that taking our offer would eliminate the existence of your daughter. Knowing that, we have only one question for you. Is there anything we could say to make you reconsider? And the response of Mark is no. And this thing says, then you have doomed this world. You are a disgrace. And then just sends him back to where it was that he came from. And so ultimately, of course, he's able to escape that hole. But when he gets out there, essentially all these ships that were like scouring the area, where like they were looking for Thrag and all that kind of stuff before he got yanked down here, they're all seemingly destroyed, right? They're just like crashed down here, and it looks like they've been there for a while. Ultimately, Mark escapes the planet and then races back to Telescria to find Adam Eve, who of course is just kind of chilling there and just sort of doing her thing. And then like when she sees Mark, she's totally flabbergasted to see him. Now, here's the thing. You wouldn't think she would be, because at this point, there have been multiple instances where Mark has been gone for months, right? For like days or weeks or months. It just kind of goes with the territory. And so the reason why she's totally shocked here to see him, you know, and where he's just like, oh my God, like I'm, you know, like I have to talk to you like these creatures. I was pulled through time, and like I was in the past, and they wanted me to change history and to choose like the death of Tara in order to like save that reality, you know, like all these crazy things. You know, he was like, it's you know, I couldn't do that, right? Like I had to come back here. I had to be with you. I had to be with our daughter, you know. And so she's like, I mean, are you okay? I mean, it's a lot to go through, Mark. Like, it's a lot to have happen, you know? And he's like, I mean, I'm really not. He was like, but I need to see Tara, right? Where is she? Like, I need to hold her. I need to be able to talk to her. And he's like, you know, she's like, Mark, I mean, Tara's inside, but there's something you have to understand. And that's when Mark realizes the reason why Adam Eve was so shocked to see him is not because Mark has been gone for days or weeks or months. It's because Mark's been gone for years. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.